section. Embracing universal design for learning in asynchronous learning resources. Feel free to ask questions in the chat as we're going. We try to incorporate questions that were asked beforehand into our presentation, but we can always have more of a discussion at the end. So I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Joanna Namath, and I am the interim
Did we just lose Joanna, or is that just me?
No, I think we lost her.
Okay, I will screen share and pick this up. Okay, just 1 second. So she was saying she is the interim manager of library information services at Athabasca University. Let's see here.
Yeah, that's the last I heard.
Yeah, okay. Here we are. All right, can you see this introduction screen?
Sorry about that. I just got booted out for a second.
Hey, welcome back. All right, so if it's okay, Joanna, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jorden Habib. I'm the distance education specialist for the Canadian Women for Women in Afghanistan.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jorden. I'll just do a quick land acknowledgement. So I currently live in Treaty 7, known as Mokinstis, the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy. So that's Siksika, Ganai, Pikene, and then also the Tsuut'ina and the Nakota nations of Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw, and the Métis Nation Region 3 within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. And Athabasca University is on the border of Treaty 6 and 8. This is also where Jorden lives. So we recognize and acknowledge this is traditional and ancestral land, home to many First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, and is the traditional homeland to the Cree, Dene, and Métis, including our neighbors from Alexander Cree Nation, Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, Enoch Cree Nation, Paul First Nation, Athabasca Chippewa First Nation, Fort Chippewa Métis, and the Mikisew Cree First Nation. And just to give you a little background on Athabasca University, so that you have some context as we're going through the presentation, all the undergrad courses are asynchronous and can be started any month of the year. There are graduate cohorts that follow a more traditional schedule, and everything is fully online. So that's how we got into discussing interactive images. So I'll just quickly go over our agenda and our learning goals. Jorden, if you want to just click on number 1, you can just click next. So we're going to start with a little warm up to give you some idea of some of the interactive images you can use. Then we'll go into an overview of interactive images and how that applies to universal design for learning. Then we'll go into different program options you can use, and we can kind of decide which ones will be best for you. Then we'll take more of a shallow dive into ThingLink and the basics of how to use it. Then we'll go on to give you some time, flip it over to you to start creating your own image. We're not expecting anything super complex, but give you about 10 minutes to take some time and work on some of the tools and try them out. And we'll hopefully have time to share them at the end and kind of debrief about what our thoughts are about them as we're going. So our learning goals for this session are that by the end of this workshop, you'll be able to identify instances where you could use interactive images in your own instruction work, create interactive images with multisensory components, and apply universal design for learning to your own interactive images. And I'm going to hand it over to Jorden to start our what interactive images are.
Yeah, so we're just going to start right here. So an interactive image is quite simply an image with interactions, typically hotspots that display text, other images, and or incorporate other media. There's a lot you can do with these. They're pedagogically appropriate strategies to engage learners and to create more effective learning resources. They align really beautifully with the SAMR models. You can look at opportunities for interactive images as a substitute, an augmentation, a modification, or a redefinition of your instruction. They can be simple interactive graphics with chunked content like what you see here, or they can be digital stories with oral elements. You can have learner-created demonstrations of learning as well. There is so much potential for interactive images to move beyond text-based learning and teaching resources and to increase the universal design for learning of your currently static asynchronous material. So we want to start with a warm-up. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes to have a look through a few different interactive images. So here we've got 5, and we'll share the link in the chat here. Or Joanna, can you share a link to the RISE course? So under the little warm-up tab, you're going to see 5 different images, and they vary in degree of complexity, accessibility, and quality. So we'd like you to take a couple minutes and have a look through them. Please mute yourselves though, because some of these do have audio, and the audio automatically plays when you click on it. So we've got a couple different ranges here. Most of these are in ThingLink, but there's one in H5P. So this will give you a good opportunity to look at some different options. And at the bottom of the page here, we have a Padlet, and we'd love to hear what you think worked, what you think didn't work, what you would change, what you liked, what you didn't. Just a couple of comments here would be really helpful. And we'll come back and touch on those at the end of our, we're going to say a 4-minute warm up. Okay. I think you have the link in the chat here. There it is. Yes. So Joanna just shared that. So you should be able to open that up. It should work on any browser. And then you'll just open it, click Start Course, and then go to Warm Up Activity, please. Okay, we'll start our 4 minutes now.
And there's no hard feelings if you dislike some for whatever reasons. That's always useful to hear.
Yeah, some of these are ones we made a couple of years ago, and then we've been slowly improving them. And I don't think we didn't grab even some of like our best ones here. I just wanted to give you a range of different things. So, and some of these I hate. So yeah, feel free to be critical. Okay, let's come back, please. You're more than welcome to take a look at these after the session, and please feel free to send us any additional comments that you have. Let's touch on the comments that we have here right now. So the Discover results being overwhelming. Absolutely. There are so many things going on here. And I'm sure you can imagine if you were on a tablet or a mobile device and you were trying to have a look at this, it's going to be quite complex to get through all of these. Some of these, one of the other comments was about how text heavy some of the pop-ups are. Absolutely. Some of these are way too text heavy. There's too much in there. Ideally, you don't want your learners scrolling too much, right? So if you can succinctly convey it in one box, that would be ideal, but that can be challenging. Sorry about my scrolling here. Somebody else asked about the extra explanation needed. That's always a challenge too. When you're looking for an ed tech tool, you want something that's going to be fairly intuitive for your users, and interactive images can be really challenging if you have users with lower digital literacy proficiency. So I use these in my courses in Afghanistan, and we found that the majority of our users have very low digital literacy proficiency, and the average rate of literacy for women in Afghanistan is about 30%. So we're dealing with a lot of complexity there. And we have found that interactive images are one of the best pedagogical tools for us because they do intuitively see that hotspot, it's flashing, and they know to click on it. But we do include notes above, just like a quick one-sentence instruction saying, please click on the spots below within the image. And we use a single color for all of them, and so that it's a little bit easier for the learners to get through it. But yeah, you will find that some of your students have trouble with that. Search process, problematic. Need to pause to find the hotspots. Yeah, it's helpful to take in the info. That's a good point. You know, at first glance, if your learner is looking at this and they're immediately off put because they're not sure what to do, that's a problem. So maybe something like changing the hotspot color or even moving the hotspot outside of the graphic could be a viable option to test it out and see if that makes it a little bit easier. But I think you're right that while they're kind of trying to figure out what the hotspots are and how to work through this, maybe they're reading that section and they're taking that in. So that's something to consider. And then there was one about the voiceovers. Absolutely, the voiceovers are so helpful. It does bother me a little bit that they auto start, but in some ways I think that's nice because then you don't have to search for that audio button. Because I wonder how many learners would miss that audio component if they didn't see that little mic icon or the speaker icon. So in that way, it's kind of nice. The one thing I will say about the audio component is that you need to record high quality audio. I'm sure you noticed the quality here is not great. And that does take away from the learning experience a little bit. Okay, so we're going to move on here, but thank you so much for your comments. We'll come back to this a little bit, or we can come back to this at the end of the session if you'd like. Okay, so we are going to jump into the UDL component of our presentation and talk a bit more about why interactive images are so valuable as a universal design for learning strategy. So UDL, for those who aren't familiar, is creating a space that is flexible enough for all learners to have an equal opportunity to learn. And for us as information professionals and educators, it means that we need to provide our content in different ways so that students can engage with it in whatever way best suits them. So these interactive images, they allow us to increase the multimodality of our instruction resources, and they're providing multiple means of engagement, representation, and action or expression, which are the three pillars of universal design for learning. So they give us a visual anchor, they give us learner navigation choice, it requires the learners to interact with the content. It's an opportunity, pardon me, they have the opportunity to revisit the content as often as desired in any order they wish. And the design forces chunking into smaller portions as tags. So let's go through some of the guidelines that are specific to interactive images or relate to that. So guideline 1 is about perception. Interactive images allow for the provision of information through different modalities. And many of the programs allow for adjusting by the user, which is a huge advantage. Most programs will give you the option for images, text, audio, and or video within the tag. And that's really beneficial because multisensory learning increases retention. Guideline 2 is about language and symbols. As I'm sure we all know, vernacular can be a huge barrier. So interactive images can be a great way to break down things like interfaces, decode terminology, explain processes and systems, incorporate definitions and translations as needed. And you're doing all of that while using multiple media. For our work in libraries, we've used them for things like interface instruction, breaking down article anatomy, dissecting key concepts, providing virtual tours of spaces and tools, and visualizing processes. Number 3, the one I like the most and I feel has a ton of value here is comprehension. So for constructivist approaches, interactive images can support scaffolded learning experiences by helping your learners activate their prior learning and build connections between what they already know and this new content that you want to present. So hotspots can be really great for highlighting key concepts, patterns, and relationships to facilitate that learning process. For example, you can start with an image, a model, or a framework that your learners are familiar with, and then you add that new information that you want them to understand over top of that. So you're giving them a frame of reference, and then you're adding some depth and complexity to what they already know. They can be great for digital storytelling. You can give suggested progression tags, and you can include audio clips, and it elevates it to a more holistic learning experience. You can also use a wide range of languages in most of the tools, and you can tailor that to your learners. The interfaces themselves do have limited options. They're primarily Latin-based alphabets, although ThingLink does support Arabic, Hebrew, and simplified Chinese. But I've also used them for Pashto and Jari, and I found that they work really well. I just do my base graphic in the language that I need, and then I copy and paste my text for the hotspots from a Google Doc over into the program, and I just use an Arial font for that. There's also a BC Sans typeface that you can use for Indigenous languages that could be a viable option too. So interactive images also lend themselves really well to chunking. You have a character cap for most of these text boxes, so you do have to be quite succinct and quite focused when you're conveying your content. And chunking your content is an incredibly important strategy for your adult learners. You want to put it in smaller parcels so it's easier for them to assimilate that knowledge. Okay, next guideline is recruiting interest. These are a viable alternative to your static graphics that you might include on a library guide or on your website. They're a lot more fun than just looking at a simple graphic. You're giving your learners the option to select the hotspots as they wish, when, in what order, how often, and it's up to them. Like, you're putting them in charge of that interaction. And it's a low risk learning experience with some variety and interest. Just something different. Okay, which also brings us to our action and our physical action guideline. So pedagogically for asynchronous instruction, our content interactivity is critical. When you're thinking about creating your best possible online learning environment, you want to have learner, instructor, and learner content interactions. But for asynchronous, unfacilitated, standalone, or pointed need teaching and learning resources, you have to emphasize that learner content interaction, because that learner, and learner teacher option might not be available to you. So while Universal Design for Learning is creating that space that's flexible enough for all learners to have an equal opportunity to learn, accessibility, or guideline 4.2 here, is about removing the barriers so that that multimodal content is accessible to everybody. Many interactive image tools support accessibility and UDL through the provision of audio recordings, alternative text, multiple languages, high color contrast. You have adjustable displays and alternate accessible versions of the content. So most of them have an option where you can display it in a separate tool. ThingLink, for example, has a built-in immersive reader that only works with the main interface languages, but it also has a web view that supports keyboard navigation. Its accessibility player also shows the transcript of all of the content and has the tags in plain view with a special widget that will allow the user to change the display for a screen reader. Okay, and then the last guideline here that I wanted to touch on is an action and expression guideline, and this one's learner-centered. So interactive images are fantastic tools to engage learners as creators. As a user, it's fairly low barrier, and they can be used as a really valuable assessment and data collection tool. You could use these to engage learners in creating visual representations of their learning, have them summarize their process, have them describe their experience, tell their story, identify their challenges, explain their understanding, and so on. You're giving them voice and choice, and that's really important in a safe and caring learning environment. For the LIS professionals here, interactive images as creation tools could give your learners an opportunity to describe their processes and experiences using your spaces and your resources, and that would give you richer data about your users' learning experiences. It's almost like photo voice, but with more layers. Okay, and then the last thing I wanted to touch on here is not a UDL guideline, but some considerations that you may want to bear in mind if you're looking at some authoring tools. So some of the key things you'll want to consider are program value, training, analytics, and assessment. So first, consider the overall program or tool value. So when we were considering which tools to use for Athabasca, and then when I was subsequently looking for ones that would work for Afghanistan, we evaluated things like the cost of the license, program affordances, the usability for the designers and the users, the barrier to use, including bandwidth, and the program ceiling. And since Joanna and I were using interactive images for the first time in our library guides, we wanted a program with some analytics so that we could consider user interactions with the images as part of our ROI, or return on investment discussions. I would also recommend exploring the tool's training resources as well as the learnability. They are fairly low barrier for the most part, but you will run into obstacles, and it's good to know that there are resources there that will work for you. Analytics and assessment may also be really important for your work. Most of the tool dashboards, you have to pay for those, but they provide descriptive analytics. So it's going to require some assumptions regarding the cause of patterns because the context is unavailable. But the evidence of use and the data on the extent of use is really helpful for object revisions and subsequent object design. Last thing, assessment. So for both learner feedback and checking for understanding, embedded assessments would be ideal. Some of the tools, Genially in particular, are beta testing closed formative assessments. So multiple choice, true, false, select all, and that's all within the tool itself. And last I checked, they were working on a better tool for feedback because being able to give your learners feedback on those assessments is really critical to their learning process. And so I would say, if you're looking at an authoring tool, think about those options and prioritize what's really most important to you as a professional. What do you really need? And then make that one of your deciding factors in which authoring tool is going to work best for you. Okay, so now we're going to jump over and talk a little bit about different program options. So I'm going to pass this back to Joanna. Joanna, did you want to share your screen or do you want me to work through this for you?
I think I can switch over and share my screen, sure.
Okay.
Okay, can you see that? Okay, awesome. So we're just going to quickly go over kind of the basics of the differences between the 4 programs that we're discussing here that are kind of the main ones. The nice thing with technology is that it's always changing. There's always new programs coming out and different versions, as Jorden was saying, beta testing and that type of thing. So you can go over in detail the bigger differences. And as you're making your decision, it's always good to double check on those pages. But we'll start by talking about ThingLink. So you've seen a lot of examples of that throughout our presentation. It is super accessible, super easy to use. It has the most long-term free options. I think it only includes analytics if you pay, but the cost is very affordable. I think it was at some point like $25 a year for a professional, something like that. So it's like very reasonable. Then we'll go on to Genially. So you've seen a couple examples of this. Genially can get into more complex interactive images, and it is quite affordable and easy to use. And as Jorden showed you when she was going through this presentation, there's various different ways that you can go through different slides and add more of a presentation or video experience. H5P, I'm sure you've all used H5P or heard of it in some way, but it's an open source tool and it includes an interactive image tool. It is technically free, but hosting cannot be done from the H5P site. So it has to be loaded onto a local server and uploaded to an LMS or a website. So there are plugins available for some of the major LMSs and websites. And as you can see here, this is just a screenshot of an interactive image to give you an example because we couldn't host it through this RISE course that we're using. And last is Articulate, and I don't think we've mentioned this, but this whole course that we're presenting in right now is a RISE Articulate course. So Articulate is quite an expensive account, but it does offer 2 interactive image options. So the agenda I showed at the beginning, and I think some of Jordan's examples in the warm-up activity are both RISE interactive images. They can only be used within a RISE course, but they can be really, really useful within those, and they look really awesome. One other fallback is that there's not a way to share just one page. So if you wanted to direct someone directly to your interactive image, you'd have to be like, go to this course, jump down to program options, and then take a look at the interactive image there. You'll notice there's no interactive image included here because you're not allowed to add them to accordions. But I figured you'd seen enough throughout. And Storyline is also included in the RISE accounts, and it is a separate program that is used on the desktop, and it's quite a bit more complex. You can make some really cool stuff with it. It has quite a steep learning curve, so it's pretty tricky to use, but it can be embedded into a site or onto an LMS. So there's some perks to using that. So just to touch on the analytics, I know I touched on it a little bit. They all require a paid account to gain access to these. Articulate, even with the paid account, you'd still need to set up Google Analytics for it. So it's trickier to figure out, but there are various options within it. And we'll go through this once we get into our activity, but this is just kind of a breakdown mind map of how we can start thinking about, depending on what type of interactive image you want to create, which program would be best for you. So that is in the activity a little later on, and I'll let Jorden get into ThingLink. Did you want to take back control, Jorden?
Sorry, would you mind just hitting continue? And then just jump down to the ThingLink image there. Thank you. Okay, so this is basically how most of your interactive image tools are going to work. You'll open up your account, you'll go to upload your image, and then you'll need to pick an image from your device. Yeah, so just click on that. And then once you're in there, you'll have your image up, you verify that's the one you want, and you'll click on your edit options. Once those open up, you're going to see the tag options available to you. So you'll pick what you want. As soon as you open up any of those, you're going to see all the different accessibility options available to you, including embedding your multimedia and recording your audio. When you're done adding all of your tags, you'll want to hit done on this main interface in order to save your work. So if you click on done, then once you come over to this page, so this is the gray area around your interactive image when you go to view it, you'll have your ellipses, your share, and your edit. So if you click on the ellipses, you'll see more options there, and you'll need to go under your privacy settings and amend your view settings so that you can make it either public or unlisted. And then that's where you're going to be able to change it so that you can make this available to your students. I usually go with unlisted, and then you just click save. And if you can just click back, Joanna. Yeah, thank you. And then you'll go to share to grab your URL. So most of the tools work in these have like a very similar navigation path for your design process. And we just wanted to make sure you were aware of those privacy settings because we would really appreciate it if you would share your images with us after like your work's in progress. So you'll need to change your privacy settings to do that. Now, Joanna, can you just scroll down and click on continue? We're not going to go through this, but I did want to make sure you were aware that this is here. We do have some guidelines here on how to take high resolution screenshots in Chrome. So these are just some steps on how to use your developer tools to get a really high res screenshot. As I'm sure you can imagine, the quality of your screenshot, if that's what you're using, is going to be a significant factor in how well your interactive image experience goes. Okay, and then I think that takes us into our activity time.
Awesome. So I'll just go through kind of an intro for thinking about the activity. So we're at 11:30. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to work on creating an interactive image. Nothing super complex, but just kind of try out one of the programs, add some hotspots, share the link. So I was just going to show you, this is some of the interactive images that were shared last time we did this session. So you can see someone just used like a template for an advent calendar, but it's still a good start to kind of start thinking about what activities you can create. So the first thing to do is brainstorm ideas of what types of interactive images you'll want to create, what type of interactive image you'll want to create. And I think answering these questions can be really helpful. So thinking about where it will be used, what questions it's going to answer, what learning outcome it will align with, who the primary audience is, and then how it will be shared. And I think you brought up a lot of those questions in the warm-up activity, so kind of gets you thinking there. And then you can decide on a program. So I think we did suggest everyone create either a ThingLink or Genially account, so you might have already decided, but if you want further information, you can take a look through the flow chart. Then you'll just select your image. As Jorden said, you can try taking a higher quality screenshot or just run with one you had. Most of them you can change screenshots while you're working on it. So if you find the resolution looks really bad, you can always switch that out later. And then you'll upload your image and start adding hotspots. And then you'll share your URL. Jorden showed you how to grab the shareable URL and change your image to be shareable or public or unlisted. But what you'll more or less do is click the add button and then the dots, and then you can put your link in there. And you'll see it's kind of nice to be able to see what everyone's looks like there. So we'll let you get started, and feel free to ask questions in the chat or come into microphone if you prefer to have more of a chat if you're really stuck on something, and we'll give you 10 minutes to work on that, and then we'll do kind of a debrief and any other questions or discussion points that come up.